Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. Putting America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It's Tuesday, October 1st, 2013, start of a brand new month here. All kinds of stuff going on. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to swoop down on the phone when it rings as you call in with your comments and questions. I imagine you're probably going to have a few things to say about what's going on. A couple of really quick program notes. Tomorrow, Mike Nash, who makes these little privacy cases for iPhones, will be calling in to discuss this story about hidden 3G chips and secondary processors in our personal electronic devices. On Thursday, October 10th, Kevin Barrett will be on our show talking about his new book and other current events. Obviously, the big story today is the U.S. government has hit a shutdown. Huzzah, huzzah! 3 cheers for the government shutdown. Happy Independence Day, probably another way to do that. Of course, the celebration is premature, because what's going on is the government hasn't shut down. They have turned off certain aspects of the government that we like, we the people like. Access to the national monuments and national parks has been shut off. NASA is down to running on a skeleton crew. NOAA is no longer sending out weather alerts or anything like that. Checks to veterans may be cut off. Food stamp money may be cut off if this goes on long enough. Now, they've basically put 800,000 government workers on furlough. And there's something you need to understand. When the shutdown is turned off, they get all their pay retroactively, so they're not really suffering out there. But the remainder of the 4.4 million government workers who are doing things we, the people, do not like are still in place, doing those things that we do not like. NSA is still spying on us all. FBI is still covering up the crimes of the rich and powerful. CIA is still running drugs and torturing people. Treasury is still bailing out Wall Street. USDA is still covering up the problems with GMOs. FDA is still ignoring the problems with vaccines. SEC is still turning a blind eye to Wall Street fraud. And the U.S. wars of aggression continue unabated across the face of the earth. Now let's look at some numbers. The media is trying to make a big deal that the federal shutdown has put 800,000 federal workers on furlough. And that does sound like a lot of people, until you look at the size of the government as a whole. The current size of the federal government is 4.4 million people. Now, the federal government has been boasting that it's been reducing the size of government, but as is always the case, there's a bit of a flim-flam here, as jobs formerly done by federal government employees have been transferred to contractors, who are not counted as part of the size of the government. Just like people who have been out of work so long they've quit looking and they're off benefits aren't counted as unemployed. It's just a way of fudging the numbers here. Now, exact numbers of federal contractors are hard to come by because one contract can mean multiple workers, who on average are paid 1.83 times what equivalent private sector workers are paid. But the best estimate that I could find in my web search this morning was there are between 7 million and 7.5 million federal contractors doing jobs that used to be done by federal employees. So 4.4 million plus 7.5 million is 13.9 million people working as part of the federal government, you know, spying on us, managing us, corralling us, whatever they're doing here. So putting 800,000 workers on furlough is only a tiny fraction of the total federal government, about 6%. Now, private companies are shaving that same percentage off their workforce every day, but they don't get massive media headlines proclaiming it's a disaster. And of course, the additional 21 million state and local government annoyances are open for business as usual today. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the federal government shutdown is only affecting those portions of government we, the people, approve of. It's actually a form of extortion to force us to accept those parts of the government we all hate, like the NSA, TSA, Department of Homeland Security, to get back the things that we want, such as government permission to enjoy our national parks, feed the hungry, take care of the vets, and so forth. And behind all this debate about budget, shutdowns, Obamacare, and debt, there is a question the federal government is terrified that Americans are starting to ask. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution authorizes the U.S. government to create and issue interest-free money. So why is the federal government plunging future generations of Americans into unpayable debt by going to a privately owned central bank to borrow money at interest? It's all just numbers in a computer and ink and paper. And the federal government doesn't want you to ask that question because they don't really have a good answer for doing such a stupid thing. This nation fought a revolution to be free of such predatory banking scams. And treating the public currency as a public utility for the common good of all worked pretty well in our nation's history. And the government can't claim not to have known what an absolute calamity the passing of the Federal Reserve Act would be, because the Federal Reserve was the third in a series of private central banks foisted on the American people by corrupt Congresses and corrupt presidents. And they knew full well what they were doing based on the history of the first two. I have a quote here. I've said it before. You're going to get it again. Gentlemen, I've had men watching you for a long time, and I am convinced that you have used the funds of the bank to speculate in the breadstuffs of the country. When you won, you divided the profits amongst you, and when you lost, you charged it to the bank. You tell me that if I take the deposits from the bank and annul its charter, I shall ruin 10,000 families. That may be true, gentlemen, but that is your sin. Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You are a den of vipers and thieves. I intend to rout you out, and by the eternal God, I will rout you out. That was President Andrew Jackson, who succeeded in shutting down the second bank of the United States. Here's another quote. I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all of our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinion and duress of a small group of dominant men. That was President Woodrow Wilson writing in his diary after signing the Federal Reserve Act. So, pay no attention to the fury over a 6% reduction in the federal government workforce. Pay no attention to the screams about Obamacare. The focus needs to be on the utter ridiculousness of the federal government, which has the authority to create and issue interest-free money, borrowing that same money at interest from a privately owned central bank, forcing you and your descendants to pay the ruinous interest for your entire lives. Here's another quote. We were talking about this on yesterday's show. If our nation can issue a dollar bond, it can issue a dollar bill. The element that makes the bond good makes the bill good also. The difference between the bond and the bill is the bond lets money brokers collect twice the amount of the bond and an additional 20%, whereas the currency pays nobody but those who contribute directly in some useful way. It is absurd to say that our country can issue $30 million in bonds and not $30 million in currency. Both are promises to pay, but one promise fattens the usurers and the other helps the people. That was Thomas Edison writing in the New York Times, 6th of December, 1921. So even back then, the best minds of the nation understood that this Federal Reserve Act and this enslavement to a private central bank issuing all of the public currencies alone at interest was a trap. It was enslavement. And it only works as long as the people believe that's the way it's supposed to be. And we all need to be private central banking heretics and understand it is a scam. And that is the question that every one of you ought to be asking of yourselves and everybody you know. Why, when the government is allowed under the Constitution to issue and create and issue interest-free currency, are they borrowing currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? Does it make any sense at all to have this as the economic system of the United States of America? We're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. Hi, America, welcome back to the show. And of course, over on the corporate media, the fingers are pointing. The blame shift regatta is well and truly underway. It's their fault. No, they were being intractable. No, it's their fault. They're trying to keep the little partisan divide going there. But again, the reason this nation is in such dire straits goes back to that question I asked last segment. Why, when the federal government is authorized by the Constitution to create and issue its own interest-free currency, are they going to borrow currency at interest from a privately owned central bank? and this is not unique to the United States of America. All over the world, every nation enslaved to such a private central bank is drowning in unpayable debt, and it is unpayable by design. Because the way this banking system is set up, it always produces more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And they're pointing fingers at each other and Obamacare and the rest of it, because that is the one question this government and these money junkies do not want you thinking about. And it goes all the way back to the American Revolution and King George III's Currency Act, which did to the colonies exactly what the Federal Reserve Act did, compel them to conduct all business using banknotes borrowed at interest from a privately owned central bank. We're there. We're back where the Declaration of Independence was written in terms of the abuses and usurpations of this government. Now, Obama, of course, is making the rounds, speaking and spinning and trying to put the best space on there, and apparently over on CBS, he was expressing his ire that the budget bill is not being passed and Obamacare is being attacked. And he repeated a statement he's made several times before, that America must not default on paying our debts. What do you mean, our debts, Mr. Obama? This government has been borrowing recklessly and spending on things we, the people, never agreed to. We never agreed that you should borrow billions of dollars to build this NSA spy system to keep watch on us. A clear violation of the Fourth Amendment. Why are we obligated to repay those loans? We don't agree with any of these wars of conquest that the U.S. has been fighting across the face of the earth for the last 12 years. Why are we supposed to pay for that? It's a real sweet deal for the federal government to be able to borrow and spend as much as they want and just say to the American people, you're responsible for the payments. No, we're not. We're only responsible for money that you borrow to take care of the United States and the American people and buy those things we agreed should be bought. And that is not just my personal opinion. This is a recognized principle in international law called odious debt. And a huge amount of this debt that Obama is saying that you Americans are responsible for paying for is this imaginary debt on the public currency created by the Federal Reserve. It's a scam. It is a gigantic 100-year-old scam, and they're scared you're beginning to realize what a scam it is. Now, as I mentioned before, the shutdown has not shut down the entire government. It's shut down 6%, which really isn't that big a deal. But it's shut down the things we, the American people, want to have, like access to our national parks and national monuments. And as a matter of fact, there's a story that is making the rounds now where a group of World War II veterans were on this pilgrimage, if you will, to visit the World War II Memorial in Washington, D.C. And when they got there and they found the barricade saying, because of the budget shutdown, you can't visit a memorial. And they knocked the barriers over and they went in and visited the memorial. Because you know something? It's just a pile of stone. It doesn't actually cost anything to sit there. This is just the government waving these things at you that you want and saying you don't get these back until you agree to the things that you don't want. NSA spying, endless wars, and so forth. We're going to take a phone call here. Daniel in Philadelphia. Aloha, Daniel. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing? Well, thank you for everything that you do. And I was calling about Honor Flight knocking down the barriers this morning. I just think it's a fantastic thing that they did.
I agree.
Showing that how
agree.
ridiculous it is that they would shut these things down, you know. And these guys deserve more respect than the government ever gives them. And I was just really happy to see. I'm part of the Philadelphia branch up here, and, you know, our trip was going to be affected in November if the shutdown was still going. So I was just really happy to see that 2 hubs went down and just said, you know, we're coming in, and I'm just glad that nobody stopped them.
Well, I'm getting photos from listeners over at the Lincoln Memorial, you know, where the barricades and the signs are all up. Boy, they sure had enough money to print up those signs, didn't they?
And they got enough guys out there putting the barricades up there, you know?
Yeah, it's ridiculous. You know,
it costs more to do that than it does to have the fountains on, because if you notice in some of the pictures, they have the fountains off, and it's just like, well, all right.
Yeah, it's these are big piles of stone. You know, it doesn't really cost a lot for them to be open. It is just the government withholding those things that we want to get us to accept those things we don't want. And by the way, somebody just sent me a link over to the official website for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And if you go to their website, it's just a blank page now. Due to the lapse in federal government funding, this website is not available. Really? Why? The server's obviously working. If the server's working, the website should still be there. They are deliberately shutting this stuff down to make the point that if you want things like these websites and national monuments and all the rest of it back, you're going to have to go along with those things that you don't want, like endless wars, NSA spying, Obamacare. It's extortion. The federal government is committing extortion against we, the American people.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Michael.
All right, you got it. Thanks an awful lot. Now, excuse me. There we are. Now, as I said before, only 6% of the government has been shut down. And it's all this visible stuff to maximize the propaganda impact. Oh, the government shut down. No, it isn't. 6% off. They probably could have trimmed that off anyway, just as cost cutting. But they don't worry about cost cutting because they're not paying the costs. You are. And this government shutdown has not prevented the opening of that $2 billion NSA spy center. All the things that we hate about this government, all the instruments of tyranny and dictatorship, they're open for business today. And that includes Obamacare, which was such a contentious issue, and we are getting already reports from 34 states. There are major problems with this software system. Some places are saying that they're registering people today, but it's going to be January, February of next year before they can sort out the mess. Over on MSNBC, they were trying to demonstrate how Obamacare, the exchanges were going to work, and the MSNBC anchor hit problems trying to get in there. The people providing the software, $88 billion software package, have been saying for the last 2 weeks, this is not ready to go. And Obama, listening to his ego and thinking about his legacy, is out there saying, you will use it today. And the problems that are surfacing are amazing. Apparently, one company that got a $1.2 billion Obamacare contract is already under investigation for serious fraud. And there's another story, and this is coming out of 12160, where another company up in New York City that got convicted of rampant fraud on government contracts landed a contract to sign people up for Obamacare. This thing is a Charlie Foxtrot from the word go. Now, Obama was out there this morning making a speech about, it's no big deal, you know, there's always going to be a few small problems. And he's out there saying, you know, Apple didn't stop selling iPads because of a few glitches. Yeah, but after that Hindenburg blew up, people did quit riding dirigibles. And nobody forces people to buy the iPad. So it's a loose analogy. Got to take a break for commercials. We will be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And a member just posted an article over at whatreallyhappened.com showing a screen capture of this Obamacare enrollment software. And when you look at it, and you ought to, you will realize how absolutely obvious it is. This software system was not ready for deployment. Most of the little windows where you're supposed to enter information do not even have labels. There are just the names of software variables above it. Some of them simply say undefined, lots of question marks all over the page. Now, I've done a lot of computer programming in my time, and I've worked in professional software development areas. You would never, ever let something this obviously unready out the door. And yet his Obama-ness is out there saying, you will use this. It starts today. I have said so. This is a joke. And sorting out this mess with this software, loading data into this starting today, it's going to cost 10 times as much money trying to sort it all out, and they may never sort it all out. Remember the confusion over the mortgage electronic reservation system that's screwed up all those titles and everything during that mortgage-backed security fraud meltdown? They were never able to track down all those mortgages and notes and titles. They don't know where it went. It just vanished. And this software looks even worse than that package here. We're going to take a phone call. Dan in Oregon. Aloha, Dan. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Dan, are you there? I guess not. All righty. So turning over to the United Nations, Benjamin Netanyahu got another turn at the podium today. This time he spared us the little cartoon bomb or cartoon Christmas ornament. I was never really sure what he was talking about when he held that thing up there. And as usual, just pounded on the issue of Iran's nuclear threat. Iran's nuclear threat. They're doing this. They're doing that. Basically out there saying blah, 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 blah. Hitler, blah, blah, blah. Nazis, blah, 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 blah. Holocaust, blah, blah, blah. Anti-Semites, blah, blah, blah. Iran has nuclear weapons, blah, blah, blah. You should go kill them for us, blah, blah, blah. Did I mention Hitler? Because that's all he ever says. And I think the General Assembly got really tired of it really, really quickly. The applause that he received at the end of his speech may have been gratitude that he was finally shutting up. Or it may have just been politeness, but it certainly was not a thunderous applause, except, of course, for the U.S. delegation, which stood on their feet and cheered and threw their panties at him. We have another caller on the line, Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
What I'm always astounded with is the people who are not in favor of Obamacare are making their voices heard. They called, even when it was being passed, they called in record numbers, Senate and whatnot. Where's the cry from the people who want this? I haven't seen one person who has said,
the only people who want this are the health insurance companies, who will stand to profit handsomely now that health insurance is mandatory. We saw the same thing back when automobile insurance was made mandatory. Premiums went through the roof. Dividends, payment service went right down through the floor. And it was just a huge money-making opportunity. I mean, the health insurance industry wrote the core of this legislation. And that they stand to profit. The medical industrial complex stands to profit. Ordinary people don't want this because they can't afford it. And they're realizing now that contrary to the early claims about how this was going to provide health care to everybody at lower cost, they're realizing just how badly they've been screwed.
Well, and this is a case of you're not bringing up people who don't have health care to a level where they can receive competent health care. You're bringing down the people
You're absolutely right, and that's one of the evils of socialized medicine. We saw it did not work in the Soviet Union, and in the Soviet Union, just like here in the United States, the political class, the ruling elites aren't bound by that system. They're going to have their own hospitals and their own private medical care. They're literally bringing the Soviet system of socialized medicine here to the United States of America. Costs are going to go right through the roof. They're always screaming about the 48 million Americans who don't have health insurance. Have you taken time to realize these are the same 48 million on food stamps? If you want these people to get off food stamps and buy health insurance, bring back the high-paying jobs.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think, just the last point before I get off, I think the last barrier that needs to fall between the people of this country is realizing that the majority of us do think alike and do feel the same thing, and regardless of what the pundits say and what the political class say, we are all already united in our feelings. The fact that, like you said, the only people who want this are the insurance companies and are the politicians, that shouldn't stop us from being a united people and striking and saying, listen, no one's going to go into work. No one's going to pay taxes. No one's going to do anything until we get what we want. And that last barrier of having us be a united front is the last thing that's going to separate us from winning.
Well, this is why the government has been trying to sort of replay that old 1960s COINTELPRO tactic of splitting us apart. Blacks against whites, young against old, men against women. They're playing all the cards that worked before to divide Americans against each other, and they're not working any longer. And I think the clearest proof of that was the George Zimmerman acquittal, because for the entire week before that happened, the corporate media was hammering the point, oh, there's going to be race riots, there's going to be race riots, the blacks and whites will be fighting each other in the streets, and it did not happen, because the blacks and whites of the United States of America are very smart people and understand what the government was trying to do. And what this government cannot deal with is an American people who are now aware they are one American people of all colors, genders, orientations, and religions, and recognize the one common enemy of our nation is that private central bank issuing the public currencies alone at interest.
That is, the divide is no longer male, female, black, white. The divide is now those who are exploiting the system versus those who are being exploited by the system.
Well, the divide between rich and poor, that's the only real divide this nation has ever had to suffered under, and it's a real divide throughout all of history. And the wealth inequality in this nation is already way past what it was in Egypt at the time of their first revolution. It's already way past what they're experiencing in Greece. And the American people have been looted to prop up Wall Street, and now they're being told you will go out and you will buy this insurance at the higher prices. And for those people who think they're exempt from Obamacare because they already have health insurance, you're in for a shock, because under Obamacare, your current insurance provider can cancel your account by saying it's not in compliance with Obamacare, but here are a couple of new insurance policies you can buy at a much higher price. We ran that story last week about this family just got a notice from their insurance company. Their rates are being tripled. The policy isn't any better. They don't get any additional benefits, but the cost is being tripled to bring it in compliance with Obamacare. And you know something? On top of all of these incredibly insane taxes we're being forced to pay, when the government comes out and tells you that you will take what little money you have left and you will spend it here, that's another form of covert taxation.
I think that there's a real chance that this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
It could very well be, because most of what I'm seeing online and in my emails and comments is 6% isn't enough. We want a 100% federal government shutdown.
Well, and it's like Pelosi said, we have to pass the bill to see what's in it. The people are going to realize that now that the bill is in effect, you're going to see what's in it, and once they have the real life experience of insurance companies dropping them, rates going up, getting poorer care, no matter what anybody tells them, no matter what anybody on a screen or politician or talk show tells them, it's not going to matter, because they will have had first-hand experience with the system and being hurt by it.
Well, it's already happening. We've already been hurt by it. The reality is members of Congress don't read those bills. A lobbyist comes in with a campaign contribution or some other reward and says, I will give you this if you'll vote yes on this bill over here. And the members of Congress say, I hear and I obey. And that's what happens.
There was a big story, I'll have to send a link over to you, about the politicians all being drunk. It's 8 o'clock at night, and it's 6 o'clock at night, and they're all walking around smelling like booze. Government shutdown.
Go to Google Maps, center on Washington, D.C., and do a search for liquor stores. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I was looking over at Jim Rogers, and he's saying pretty much the same thing I am, that the government is specifically shutting down things to maximize propaganda, psychological impact on the American people, to jerk us around, to get us to go along with those things in the federal government we do not like and approve of, in order to get back those few little crumbs that they will drop from their feasting table for us to scurry around after. Dan in Oregon called back. Aloha, what's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, thank you for accepting the call. Mike, I don't want to sound negative, but, all I hear is deja vu. Because with the government shutdown, we've gone through that several times, and it's just used as a political ploy to do for the administration, as the article you just commented on. And as far as Obamacare, is that all the criticisms that were of major concerns and some less major concerns are coming to fruition, and it's going to turn into an absolute horror story as time continues. My statement is this, and I'd like to get your comment on it. It says, we know what Obama's doing with his right hand, with the government, Obamacare, the debt increase, the ceiling, and so on. I'm wondering what his left hand is doing after seeing this guy in practice for so long. Do you have any idea or comment what the left hand may be doing?
Oh, absolutely. The left hand is still pushing to get a global war going, because every time this nation is on the verge of a collapse from that private central bank, they get into a world war to get out of it. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. Crash of 2008. Look how many nations the United States has invaded, and they're still trying to figure out a way to go back into Syria. They're still trying to figure out some justification to go into Iran. It's this horrible three-step process that they go through. The instant you are enslaved to that private central bank that is issuing all the currency as a loan at interest, public debt grows and grows and grows faster than the available money supply with which to pay that debt until the public stops borrowing. But because it is a pyramid scheme and must always have new, fresh borrowing to support the cost of the old loaned money, the interest payments, that's when the Keynesian economists come in and say the U.S. government has to start borrowing on behalf of the people and without their permission. So the government starts borrowing and borrowing and borrowing until you reach a point where the people won't borrow anymore and the government can't borrow anymore, which is the situation Washington, D.C. is in right now. And it's at that point that the world wars get started, because wars force nations to borrow even more money to fight the war, and after it's all over, to borrow even more money to rebuild. And when this horrible three-step scam is over, ordinary people like you and I have pretty much what we had before, except our graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're back in debt to the private central banks for another 50 to 100 years. That's what the left hand is doing. Okay? I guess Dan hung up at that point. I must have talked him to death or something. Now, speaking of Iran and getting back to the United Nations, Netanyahu did his little speech this morning. Iran is a threat. Iran is dangerous. Iran is this. You've got to go kill him for us. And we're seeing already from inside the United Nations comments about how the Israeli Prime Minister is the most isolated individual at the United Nations. Nobody wants to see him. Nobody wants to be seen with him. They all know he is lying. Israel has been screaming that Iran is months away from a nuclear weapon since 1985. This week, Netanyahu upped the ante by saying that Iran has at least one nuclear weapon. And by the way, I'm sure Netanyahu has somebody monitoring my radio show here. One of the reasons he lacks credibility is he can't wipe that smirk off his face. He looks like a used car salesman up there who knows he's selling people a lemon and thinks they're all stupid enough to buy it, and they're not. Iran's foreign minister flat out said Netanyahu was lying, which we already knew anyway, but he is. Now, this comes one day after Netanyahu met with Obama behind closed doors, and Obama came out saying, yes, we'll keep all the options on the table, including the military. And I'm sure what Netanyahu said in that private meeting really came down to, hey, if you don't go kill Iran for us, we'll tell the world who really did 9/11, and it'll be worse for you than it is for us because we're Israel, and the world expects Israel to do stunts like this, Levant Affair, USS Liberty. But if the American people realized that the U.S. government had a hand in pulling off this false flag, oh boy, are you going to be in trouble. And Netanyahu was right on that one. Iran's foreign minister Zarif is saying that Iran will continue their peaceful nuclear program in compliance with the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And then Netanyahu upped the ante, saying that Israel will not let Iran get nukes even if Israel has to act alone against Iran. Fine. Go ahead, Israel. Attack Iran. Do it all by yourself. And when you are forced to resort to your own nuclear weapons against Iran, you will stand revealed before the world as having lied about nuclear weapons all these many, many years. Now, the flip side of that, of course, is Iran does not have nuclear weapons. Nobody's found any evidence of nuclear weapons. It's a repeat of the Iraq nuclear weapon lie. So why don't you just accept the fact that Iran does not have any nuclear weapons that anybody can find, declare success, and shut the heck up? Because we're tired of hearing about this. Now, there's another aspect of Netanyahu now claiming Iran has at least one nuclear bomb. And it has to do with all these indications that we're seeing for a potential new false flag, which is going to have to be more spectacular than planes crashing into a skyscraper because that's passé. We've already seen it. And Israel very well might be considering setting off a nuclear bomb in the United States and blame Iran for it. But looking for what should be there and isn't, why would Iran do something that suicidal? Even if Iran has a nuclear weapon, they're not going to attack without provocation the United States, which is the world's most powerful nuclear nation, or Israel, which is the world's fifth or sixth most powerful nuclear nation, depending upon who you talk to. Iran is not suicidal. Iran has not initiated a war of conquest against another country in over 200 years. It's not their nature. This is just more of the same stuff that we saw with Iraq, nuclear bombs, germs, chemicals, more that we saw with Syria. He's gassing his own people. How many times do you have to be lied to before you will stand up and say, I understand I'm being lied to? Before you stand up and scream at the liars, I don't believe you anymore. You have zero credibility, and I will give you no more of my money and no more of the lives of my children to go to wars based on these lies. It's over. The days where you could just come up with any nonsensical excuse and send us off to wars, those days are gone forever. You might as well get used to it. Going to grab a quick phone call here. Brian in Georgia. Aloha, Brian. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I certainly hope more and more of the Israeli people come to their senses and the realization that Netanyahu is like waltzing their country into extinction. You know, let them go it alone. You know, let's just, you know, let Israel go head to head with the Arabs that they can't learn to live with, and we'll just sit back and see what the outcome is. You know?
Well, unfortunately, the reality is the United States government, not we the people, but the United States government is already committed to come to Israel's aid in a war with Iran, even if Israel starts it. So that's basically the card Netanyahu is getting ready to play. They're going to attack Iran, and when Iran counterattacks, Israel will turn to the U.S. and say, oh, save us, the mean Iranians, they're shooting at us. They're shooting back. They're not supposed to do that. They're supposed to just sit there and let us bomb them over and over again like Syria did. And so they'll open up the door to war with that. And we'll all be told we must go to war with Iran to save Israel, even though Israel started the conflict. And we understand that the real goal is to make sure that Iran's oil is for sale on the world market only for U.S. dollars, to get rid of Iran's state central bank, to get them to accept private central banking and compound interest. That's the real agenda. All wars are bankers' wars. We'll be back after Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, hour number 2. And the Hindenburg is definitely on fire and crashing to the ground. The corporate media is just filled with all these reports of problems with Obamacare and enrollment. It's funny, I mentioned earlier in the show that websites for like the U.S. Department of Agriculture are showing a blank page because of the government shutdown, this web page not available. But obviously healthcare.gov has not been shut down by the government shutdown. You're going to wait 4 or 5 minutes before you get the opening page. It's very much overwhelmed. But we're seeing all these reports about how the system is miscalculating premium payments. It's a complete unmitigated disaster. And it comes down to Obama making choices based on his ego and vanity than on the real world. And maybe it's because, according to reports during his first term in office, he was suffering depression. He could be on SSRIs, which don't lead to critical, analytical, logical thinking. His White House staffers around him are a bunch of career yes men and yes women who are protecting their phony baloney jobs by telling Obama what they think he wants to hear, not what he needs to know. And this is a good example. It's been in the news for a week that the people who actually wrote this $88 million software package were saying it's not ready to go. But Obama's healthcare czar was saying, yes, we will meet our deadline. No, you have not. This is a full-on meltdown. And it's not like the government is known for well-developed, intuitive, easy-to-understand computer interfaces. I have to deal with the online copyright registration system over at the Library of Congress for Claire's music, and I've never seen such a brain-dead system in my life that forces you to retype the same information over and over and over again as you go from page to page to page. Some congressman's nephew got these contracts for these things here. All right, I want to get back to this screed by Netanyahu that Iran is the threat, Iran is the danger, Iran is you've got to go. And remember, back when they were trying to sell us the idea that Iraq had nuclear weapons, Israel was in the forefront of all of that propaganda. Remember the AIPAC spy scandal? AIPAC had a spy inside the Pentagon Office of Special Plans that was leaking information to AIPAC, which AIPAC then sent back to Israel. The part of the scandal that was not well reported, for reasons that shall be obvious, is all of the fake information about Iraq's weapons of mass destruction coming from Israel to AIPAC into that Pentagon Office of Special Plans, where it was sent on to the White House. And we know the White House was smart enough to realize that Israel was lying, but the White House was looking for decision support. We've got to invade Iraq. Oh, the Israelis have got some convincing propaganda. We'll use that. Same thing they did with Syria. When the initial claim of Assad gassing his own people in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors made no sense at all, what did the White House say it was relying on? Israeli intelligence. Now, the fact of the matter is that nobody to date has found any evidence that Iran either has, is building, or is even thinking about building nuclear weapons. Everything they are doing, their power stations, medical isotopes, industrial applications of isotopes, are all permitted to Iran under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran has signed and ratified, and the United States has signed and ratified. And by the way, under Article 4 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the U.S. government is obligated to go into Iran and help them build their nuclear facilities, which is a really good way of making sure there's no clandestine bomb factory in the basement like Israel has underneath Dimona. So in refusing to comply with Article 4, with using the threat of military force to coerce Iran into surrendering its rights under that treaty, it is the U.S. government that is in violation of international law. It is the U.S. government that is refusing to live up to its international obligations, all because Israel told them to. Now, Israel is a nuclear power. They have not signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They will not allow IAEA inspections. Germany admitted not too long ago they have known for years that Israel arms those Dolphin-class submarines Germany gives them with nuclear-tipped cruise missiles. Israel has, realizing the secret is out, they're openly talking about their nuclear weapons in the Knesset, which is a public record in Israel. And most damning of all, governments that surfaced after the collapse of the former government of South Africa showed that Israel was selling clandestine nuclear weapons to other countries, which is the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to be preventing. So Israel has nuclear weapons. They have so many of them, they're selling them around the world. There are reasons to suspect that North Korea's first nuclear bomb detonation involved a weapon they purchased from Israel because its isotopic signature matched that of a joint South African-Israeli nuclear test that took place many years ago in the Atlantic, what was called the Vela incident. So we have the United States not playing by the rules. We have Israel not playing by the rules, pointing the finger of guilt at Iran, which is playing by the rules and saying they're the bad guys. Go kill them. Remember right after 9/11, and there were some odd stories in the news that quickly were Orwellized. You know, there was the dancing Israelis. There was Carl Cameron's 4-part story on the Israeli spy ring, in which a U.S. government official admitted there was evidence linking these arrested Mossad agents with 9/11, but that evidence was classified by the United States government. There was another story, and we did a flashback of it over at whatreallyhappened.com. And the headline was, FBI fury as men with nuke plans and valid Israeli passports escape. Remember when they got those dancing Israelis? And they knew they were connected to 9/11, what did the U.S. do? Send them back to Israel. Get them out of the country. Don't let anybody talk to them. And, of course, once they were back in Israel, they were on TV. They were celebrities. You know, we were there to document the event. They were treated like heroes back then. And so we have this other story about two groups of 3 men each in these white saloon cars that were pulled over by police. And they were found with plans of a U.S. nuclear plant and Israeli passports. So, anyway, Iran's foreign minister is out there basically saying that Israel can't kill all our scientists. We know that quite a few of the top Iranian nuclear scientists have met with strange and suspicious deaths. And they're reiterating the fact that Iran doesn't want nuclear weapons. They think they are detrimental to peace in the region, which is absolutely true. And everybody's talking about a nuclear-free Middle East, and the only sticking point, of course, is Israel, which is the only nuclear-armed nation there. Remember when they went up to the United Nations, and the Arab League presented a resolution saying we demand a nuclear-free Middle East, and that means Israel's going to have to surrender their nuclear weapons. And the UN said, you can't talk about Israel. You can't single them out. It's anti-Semitic. No, it isn't anti-Semitic. Israel is the only nation with these weapons. And you cannot have stability in a region where one nation is allowed to simply ignore international law. Stability means either everybody has these weapons or nobody has them. I prefer the latter. But when you have one nation with a history of belligerence and dirty dealing in possession of weapons of mass destruction and their neighbors have been disarmed, obviously there are going to be more invasions and conquests. Grab a bigger piece of Syria. Israel's already auctioning off oil rights to parts of Syria they're expecting to conquer in the coming war. Israel's getting ready to go back into Lebanon. They want that Litani River. Iran is not the problem here. Israel is, and it always has been. Absolutely always has been. And the U.S. government is completely co-opted by them. Obama just proved that. Came out of his meeting with Netanyahu saying, yes, whatever Israel says, that's what we're going to do. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back to talk about the economy after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And Fox News is rerunning and rerunning and rerunning and rerunning Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the UN screaming, Iran is a nuclear threat. They have a Death Star. They have flying monkeys. They're going to send them at you unless you go and kill the Iranians for us. Now, when Rouhani was up there making what observers all agree was a very reasoned, logical, rational, calm speech, we got little teensy excerpts, very carefully edited to change the context. We got that a little bit. Netanyahu, boy, he just has unfettered access to the public and cable, public airwaves and cable here in the United States of America, which is probably another reason why the public airwaves and cable are losing their audience, because we're all sick and tired of hearing this stuff. We've been listening to Israel scream about Iran's nuclear threat going back to 1985. We're sick and tired of hearing about it. We're sick and tired of hearing about Hitler and the Holocaust and the Nazis. Enough is enough is enough. This is the 21st century, and Israel needs to move into the present with the rest of us and stop living hopelessly trapped in the past. Going to grab a couple of phone calls here. Bill in Illinois. Aloha, Bill. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Yeah, I got an instance of where I know of Israelis spying in Northern Illinois at a company that made, I guess you could say, spy lenses for high-quality cameras that would go into, you know, high-flying planes and the satellites and stuff. They caught them 2 times, possibly 3 times, spying and getting information on how to make these lenses. And I know this because my uncle and my father ran security systems there.
Well, I mean, the Israeli spies just seem to have free access to the entire country, whether it's the Zoomcopter mall operatives, the art student scandal. Remember that one? They were selling these very cheap artworks at government offices, and it turns out the artwork represented a passive radio transponder that could be used to eavesdrop on the room, and because it was passive and not active, a bug sweep was never going to reveal it. But every time an Israeli spy is caught in this country, they just quickly ship them back home. And if you don't punish a spy as a spy, you're going to get more of these spies. And remember, when Carl Cameron was reporting on the Israeli spy scandal back in 2001, it was the largest foreign spy operation ever uncovered in U.S. history, being run by our only friend in the Middle East, Israel.
Uh-huh. Well, this was at a small company, but still they knew where to go and what they wanted, and they got caught, like I said, 2 times, possibly 3, because this was late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, nothing happened to them.
Yeah, they got turned over to the FBI.
And the FBI probably just sent them home. You know, we were seeing this again in the aftermath of 9/11, where people were just saying we can't mention Israeli spying. It'll be our jobs, our career. We've been our government and media have been completely subverted by a foreign power, and I cannot tell you how dangerous that is. And
definitely.
I remember in grade school, we were getting all the speeches about be on alert for communist subversion, and it turned out our nation was being subverted. We were being told to look in the wrong direction.
Yep.
Okay?
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, we're going to switch over to Dave in Texas. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. How are you?
Doing fine.
Great. Hey, listen, I've been listening to you for a little while and stuff, and I have to tell you, I think for about 12 or 13 years I've been putting the dots together, and more than anybody else that I know. And I got to tell you something so that you know, and I think you already know. Out of everybody I've listened to, out of anything I've read, nobody nails it better than you. And what's the guy from the Trends Forecast? He puts it right on the line too. I forgot his name. But I just wanted to let you know that I really appreciate the information that you're giving is spot on. It's awesome. It's truth. And the more and more that you do it, the more and more people understand what the real problem is. And I've been saying this to everybody. They look at me like I got 3 heads. But I tell everybody the biggest problem in this world is Israel. And until that, the AIPAC and all that other stuff gets ferreted out and brought out to the sunshine and light and everybody sees it, nothing would change. But I think people like yourself, and there's others, of course, but I think you're doing a great job, and I just wanted to let you know that.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate the kind words. And I was being interviewed on another radio show last night, and they were saying, you know, what led to all of this stuff. And, of course, my being here actually began as an accident. But if I have one gift that I'm able to bring to the public discussion is that I am able to take some very complicated processes and present them in a very simple, easy-to-understand form so that people grasp those concepts very, very quickly. We know that corporate media, corporations as a whole, and government love to obfuscate what's going on. They use euphemisms to disguise what they're talking about, and I think the most obvious example is when they talk about the growth of the economy, because the word grow and growth has a very, very positive context. Growth is good, therefore we shouldn't worry about it. But when you have a private central bank issuing that public currency as a loan at interest, what they mean by growth is increase in total indebtedness to that bank. So every time they're saying the economy is growing, it means the nation is being plunged further into debt slavery, and that is a very negative thing. People are always trying to change the meaning of words to hide what's really going on. Apparently, the carbon Nazis over at the IPCC have now declared by imperial edict that we are not allowed to refer to the medieval warming period any longer in our discussions. It has to be called the medieval climate anomaly, to conceal the fact that, yes, the world got warmer and it didn't end. So it really is all propaganda. Now, getting back to your comment about 3 heads, very obviously at this stage in our history, the American people have woken up to the reality they are the most lied to people on the face of the earth. Saddam's nukes was a turning point, followed up by more of these government lies by a government that just can't seem to understand the world has changed around them. And so they're just upping the ante with more and more lies, and all they're doing is angering the American people. And I know I've gotten tons and tons of email from people I knew 20 years ago when I first started out on this thing, and they're saying, boy, 20 years ago, man, I thought you were a real complete wacko kook here, and it turns out you were absolutely right. I still think you're a kook, but you were absolutely right.
Well, I just wanted to also let you know that and I've been trying to do my level best because I'm not nearly as good as, you know, getting my points across, but I do try to break it down to the simplest form myself for people. One of the things that you did, I thought that was awesome. It was fantastic. Was the All Wars Are Bankers' Wars video.
Okay, well, I didn't actually make the video itself. I wrote the article and I did it as a radio show, and somebody else grabbed the audio and they made a video to it. And it's a very, very powerful presentation.
Oh, no, yeah, the visual is one thing, but the way you framed it and brought everything, again, you brought it right down to this, so people can actually understand, because it is a huge monolithic, you know, quagmire of matrixism, and it's crazy, and people don't have the time or they don't have the patience. And when I watched it, because I always, before I send anything out of my emails, I always read or watch what I'm going to send, and then I put myself in their heads. Will this be something they can understand? I love sending that one out. That was just so eloquent and so precise and so factual that I thought that some threads of light would get through, even if they only watched it for 10 minutes.
Well, the interesting thing about it, I've had a lot of email come back from that from people who are saying for the first time in their lives, U.S. history now makes sense. All the assassinations, all the wars, you know, we're always given Cray's lone nut, gassing his own people, all these other excuses, and people say, why is this going on? And now they're saying, aha, now I see the common thread underlying most of U.S. history. And it is getting out there, and it's gone viral, and people are sharing it. And people are waking up. As Zbigniew Brzezinski says, we're in the middle of a global political awakening. Of course, from Zbignew's point of view, that's a bad thing, because they can't rule us with lies anymore, and that's the way it should be. Got to take a break. We'll be right back. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to talk about the economy, and I'm going to preface it by, again, asking this question that every one of you should be asking, not only of yourselves, but of your friends, family, co-workers, co-students, everyone you talk to. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution authorizes the federal government to create and issue interest-free currency, put it into circulation to support commerce. Why then is this government constantly borrowing currency from a privately owned central bank at interest? It makes no sense at all. Now, the way it works is the federal government goes to borrow money from the private central bank, and it trades treasury bonds for that money that are interest-bearing. Then the Federal Reserve turns around and sells those treasury bonds to private investors and banks. And you, the taxpayer, spend the rest of your life paying off the interest on those treasury bonds. It is a system of enslavement. And because that Federal Reserve is operating as a pyramid, the new money being created to pay off the interest on the old money, it has to break down sooner or later. And the people who created this system, they didn't care. They lived lives of wealth and privilege and power, and they went to their graves happy at what a wonderfully comfortable, luxurious life they've had. And if it was all going to crash sometime in the future, hey, we're dead, not our problem anymore. That's the way these people think. This nation was started with the public currency as a public utility, and it was stolen from us. And now we have to take it back. We have to return the public currency to being a public utility and not a for-profit private venture that sells us into slavery to the money junkies. They're trying to bring back feudalism, where the money junkies own it all, the 1% own it all, and we spend our lives paying rent for everything. Houses, cars, clothing. Actually rent clothing now in some large cities. Now, following the U.S. government shutdown, which again, we're only talking about 6% of the entire federal workforce, including contractors, are now on furlough. The dollar sunk to an 8-month low against other global currencies. And the reasoning is very simple because of that mechanism I just put out there. The dollar's value is propped up on a promise that somewhere down the road, taxpayers will come up with that money to give to the government so the government can make good on those treasury bonds. Well, with a government shutdown, Obviously, some people are going to be very worried about the government making good on those Treasury bonds. And merely raising the debt ceiling may not assuage their concerns. Because with all the times the debt ceiling has been raised, it's very obvious the federal government is now more deeply in debt than it can ever get out of. There's a Treasury bond bubble. The U.S. government has issued more Treasury bonds than there are Americans able to redeem. Which is why everybody's thinking, hey, let's start a war. Let's conquer the rest of the world and steal their wealth to make the private central banks happy. There is a direct link from private central banking to wars of conquest. It is inescapable. Now, Standard & Poor's is saying that if the debt ceiling is not raised, they will cut the U.S. debt rating to junk. The U.S. government is now estimated to be $221 trillion, with a T, dollars in debt. That's not just the official debt of $16 trillion, but all of the off-budget obligations, unfunded mandates. The total obligation, promises the federal government has made on your wallet, total $221 trillion. That works out to roughly $1 million for every American family. Most American families will never see $1 million in their entire lifetime, let alone have an extra million sitting around that they can give to the government and get nothing back for it. Now, the government is relying on one of those amendments to the Constitution that was rammed through in the wake of the Civil War. And it's the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, which says the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. And they bandy that around saying, look, we can borrow whatever we want, and you have to pay it, you're not allowed to question it. Except that the 14th Amendment was specifically aimed at the states. This was all before the personal income tax came along, where revenues were coming from corporations and state collections. And the states were saying, look, this federal government is out of control. They're borrowing money and telling us we have to pay it. And so Congress rammed through the 14th Amendment. I'd like to see if that one was actually ratified as well, saying the validity of the public debt shall not be questioned. You know something? That's complete, total nonsense. Everyone in America should question the validity of the U.S. public debt because of that unconstitutional private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. And I'll tell you why it's unconstitutional. Because in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, which empowered the federal government to create and issue the money, interest-free, there is no provision in there for that authority to be transferred or delegated. And that means the only way the Federal Reserve would be legal is with a constitutional amendment. And it was proposed, would have been the 17th Amendment, but as you're probably already aware now, they had a little bit of difficulty getting that 16th Amendment authorizing the income tax through ratification. And nobody inside the Federal Reserve or the Internal Revenue Service of the U.S. government can actually prove that it was ever actually ratified. And we have this lawsuit called Sullivan versus United States that came out a few years ago, and it's a rather interesting situation because Sullivan sued the United States to stop the war in Iraq because there was no constitutionally required declaration of war by Congress. And Sullivan made the argument before District Judge James C. Fox that just because prior presidents had gotten away with breaking that part of the law was no reason to allow the current president to do so. Because just because somebody, we have 5 unsolved murders doesn't mean we shouldn't convict the murderer that we catch. Judge James C. Fox came back and said that through long use of mechanism, laws will be considered the law even if they aren't really legal. And he chose as his example the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, the Income Tax Amendment. And he states right in the court record, if you go back and actually look, a sufficient number of states never ratified that amendment. And then he goes on to say, but we're just sort of used to collecting income taxes on it, so we sort of accept it as the law of the land. So we have Judge James C. Fox acknowledging the 16th Amendment was never ratified, confirming that the judges already know that, and saying that the judges, who are all paid from tax revenues, are cool with going along with this fraud against the American people. It's all a gigantic scam, and I know a lot of people are thrown by the enormity of the fraud that has been perpetrated against the American people over the last 100 years by the bankers and the government itself. But it is inescapable. It is a fraud. Our nation's powerful, strong economy of public currency as public utility was hijacked. It was stolen from us. We need to take it back. We're going to take a phone call here. C in California. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
It's Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Okay. I am so enthused by the information you put out there. Quite an honor to talk to you. I'm in some deal of pain, and I'm nervous about making this phone call, but I've got 5 points, right on the money. Okay.
Okay. Now I may have to take you through the commercial break because we've only got a couple of minutes.
I want to make these points.
Go ahead and start. Go ahead and start.
Okay. I've been studying this since '95 or so. Back then, I called Jerry Brown, the governor of California, when he had a radio show in California in 1995, and I stated on the air that it was the private central bank, the Fed, at the core of this problem. Jerry, of course, said, a lot can be said about the Fed, blah, blah, blah. It was over. Number two, the art students have visited a friend at work who works for the state of California. All right, this was back in, I forget what year. And I have a different friend who bought one of the paintings who may still have it. So I'm going to track down that painting.
I would love to take a good look at that.
Yeah, and actually, I have to say, the art students came to my house. That's right. But my neighbor bought the thing. Bought the painting. Anyway.
Now listen, hang on. There are a lot of people who just sell art door to door. A lot of them are
Israeli art
and I know they were Israelis, but I don't think they were planting spy devices in individual homes. But the one that was sold to a business, especially government offices, I'd like to look at. Okay, hang on. We're going to take a commercial break. Do not hang up the phone. We're going to come right back to your points after these words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And C, you wanted to continue with your 5 points.
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. So, like I said, I've been looking at this private central bank since '95 or so, and trying to figure out why does Israel be able to control our foreign policy entirely? So, just in the last year or so, I found a coin proof. Israel 1982. This is a 1982 Israeli coin proof, Baron E.D. Rothschild coin, celebrating Israel's 34th Independence Day, 1982. 1982. On the coin, on the backside of it, says, hold on a second, centenary of his first settlement activities in Eretz Israel. Mm-hmm. That means 1882, 100 years before this coin that I have right in my hand, that was the settlement. Of course, then, what was it, 60 years later, then Israel was brought into existence by the UN after all that stuff. So, why and who is actually behind the central banks, who owns our central bank and also has built that country? Bingo! That's why we're controlled. They're same people. Okay. That's a big point. That's it. Then also what I want to know, and this is for you because you're so good at this. The bankruptcy in 1933 when they confiscated the gold and it was shipped to the Federal Reserve banks and then went who knows where. Then all of the Social Security registrations came under the Universal Commercial Code or Admiralty Law. Everything was commercialized. Or are we bought and sold in some sort of registry? Are the Social Security numbers actually collateral for securities?
I think we're tracked as a herd because all future tax revenue forecasts are based on the size of the population and the percentage of the population that's actually working. There is absolutely no question that the Rothschild banking clan, together with some of the others like the Rockefellers and the rest of it, are at the heart of this global private central banking scam, and there is absolutely no question that the government of Israel and their financial interests are very much tied up with and profiting from this private central banking scam. I don't think there's any question about that. There's a tremendous linkage there. As far as Israel's control over the U.S. government, that may in fact be coming through partly from pressure from the federal, from the from the Bank of International Settlements, which is sort of the bank at the top of this whole pyramid, saying, if you don't do what Israel tells, we'll start calling in our loans or we'll dry up your credit. There's also, of course, Israel is well known for outright bribery of members of Congress, blackmail. We know that somebody was able to get hold of recordings of Bill Clinton's phone sex sessions with Monica Lewinsky and pressured Bill Clinton into calling the FBI's hunt for Israel's top spy in the administration, just calling it off. The spy was codenamed Mega. A lot of people think it may have been Rahm Emanuel. But blackmail and bribery. And finally, if you look very carefully at the stridency of Israel's demands before and after 9/11, it's very obvious that after 9/11, Israel got much more demanding of the U.S., and the U.S. government became much more agreeable to it. And so I think Israel is literally blackmailing the U.S. government with 9/11. And I think probably future history books will look back and realize that the biggest single covert foreign policy blunder this government ever made was to agree to do 9/11 in partnership with Israel, not understanding Israel would then turn around and blackmail the U.S. government from then on. And that's why I always make that joke about when Netanyahu and Obama are meeting. First thing Netanyahu says, you don't do what I say, I'll tell the world who really did 9/11, and it'll be worse for you than it is for us.
This is the core of it. Yep. Also, one more thing I wanted to state. I've got a couple of those 1963 $5 bills from the United States Treasury that Kennedy issued.
The U.S.
before
notes.
He was taken down. U.S. notes, that's right. U.S. Treasury notes. I believe I said that.
Yeah.
Yes, and more proof. It is all. Anyway, I just want to thank you again for bringing this up. I've been tracked for a long time, and I just feel nervous, just everything. They know me. They actually know what I think now, right?
But,
and,
the best attitude is, who cares? Yeah, they're tracking me, they're monitoring me. Do you know something? I'm too old to really care what anybody else thinks about me anymore.
Well, I got a 6-year-old boy, and I'm just fighting for this whole thing, man. It's just...
Yeah, well,
anyway,
congratulations, on being a daddy. I grew up wanting to be a daddy, and it just didn't work out, so I kind of adopted the entire 330 million American population as my children.
His uncle that they need, man. They might have a... Uncle Mike. All right, man. I've said enough. I love you, bro. Keep it up, man.
All right, thanks an awful lot. Yeah, out here in Hawaii, we have a concept called ohana, which means family, but it's not just the family that you're born into and genetically linked to. It's the family you choose to have. And so it's sort of a common appellation around here that when you're with other people and children, everybody's auntie this or uncle that. So Claire is Auntie Claire, and I'm Uncle Mike for a lot of families around here. We're going to switch over to Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha, Chris. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, Michael, the quintessential case for rebuttal of the 14th Amendment slave citizenship is DYETT, D-Y-E-T-T, versus Turner, a Utah case from the post-Civil War area around 1865, 66, as I recall. I'm not sure on the year. Also, at the same time...
Can I have the name of that case one more time, because I want to try and look it up?
Absolutely. It's D-Y as in young, E as in easy, Tom, DYETT versus Turner.
All righty, thank you, and I will hunt that one down. Oh, yeah, I'm seeing it here in the Utah Supreme Court.
Right.
Okay.
You'll also find that Congress then, in their infinite thieving wisdom, decided to usurpate the power of Congress, which they theretofore never had pre-existing the Reconstruction of Government Acts of the Civil War, post-Civil War.
Well, definitely our strong central federal government was created in the aftermath of the Civil War, because prior to the Civil War, our government was following its constitutional limits. The power was reserved to the states. And along with continuing his greenbacks, I think the reason that Lincoln was assassinated was that he had stated very clearly his intention to restore the federal government to its pre-Civil War constitutional role, and obviously all those people inside the federal government who had become incredibly powerful and influential with the new war government wanted that to continue.
You are absolutely correct. And to your previous caller's point, the birth certificate is a bill of lading and the socialist slavery number is a catalog number for human resources that belong to the International Monetary Fund and the Zionist Bank of the Vatican.
I don't belong to anybody. I don't belong to anybody except my wife. I belong to my wife, but that's it. No, I don't care if I've got a Social Security number or what piece of paper anybody has. That piece of paper does not, hold influence over me. And Americans need to stand up and say, we don't care what paperwork you come up with. You don't own me. You don't own my future labor. You don't own the future labor of my children for a banking system which is at its core unconstitutional and should never have been brought into existence.
You're absolutely right. Unilateral adhesion contracts without full disclosure to both parties are abjectly unlawful and null and void ab initio. Thank you so much.
All right. Absolutely. The essence of contract law is both parties entering into a contract understand what they're committing to and what they will receive in return. So the government really does not have a foundation for saying we've come up with this whole rigmarole of tax codes and citizenship codes and Social Security that you are bound by, when the American people clearly have not been fully informed about what's really going on. But the government loves to play dirty tricks like that. The military draft, as a good example, is absolutely a violation of the 13th Amendment of involuntary servitude. And so during the draft ritual, they have this little thing where they'll line all the soldiers up and say, if you agree to serve in the military, step forward. And of course they all step forward because they don't realize that makes their draft, their induction, voluntary and gets the government around the 13th Amendment. They love to play little lawyer tricks on you. They really do. We have to take a break for Phyllis Schlafly and some commercials. We have another caller waiting on the line, Art, and when we come back from this break, Art, I will take your call first of all. And aloha, America. Welcome to hour number 3 of our program. We're going to go right to the phones. Art, aloha. Welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting. And what's on your mind today?
Well, first off, Mike, if you adopted all of us as your immediate family, can I claim to be your 18-year-old son and get on your insurance? Because I really could use it.
Yeah, but then I could claim you all as dependents.
Hey, it's better on your tax return, man. You do want to be a fine, upstanding, tax-paying citizen, don't you?
I'll get back to you on that one.
Hey, anyway, just real quick before I want to talk about Netanyahu here in his little speech this morning, but just real quick, your prior caller there had it dead on the money, only the way I explain to people because they don't really understand what a catalog number is. I started out early 80s working in manufacturing and then moved into warehouse and shipping and then on to driving a truck, so I understand the whole bill of lading and all. And, yeah, your birth certificate is like your bill of lading. Some people, I refer to it as your cargo manifest because you are being birthed. This is under Admiralty. And your Social Security number, I refer to that as your serial number because every model has its own serial number. So that's the easy way to figure that one out.
It's kind of an interesting abstract academic exercise, but what it comes down to, I mean, really, I won't go along with that. I am nobody's property.
No.
I refuse to be treated as anybody's property. We understand this government does treat the American people as a herd of livestock. When they continue to lie to us the way they are, it's obvious they have no respect for us as human beings. We're told what we can eat, what we can't eat. We're told what medications we must take, what medications we are not allowed to have. We really are being treated very much like livestock, and our labor is being harvested from us through fraud and deception, and it's just time for the American people to stand up and say, I'm not your property. I am not property of the U.S. government. I'm not property of the Federal Reserve. I'm not property of Wall Street. You got into this mess without our permission. You get out of it or not without our help.
Well, you and I agree on this. I mean, we're both on the same page, but this is how I present people who are just starting to ask the questions and don't really understand it. And once I get that to them, they understand where I'm going, and it's real easy to work with them from that point on. But anyway, Netanyahu today on the floor of at the United Nations, and I wasn't sure if I wanted to get into Barbara Mikulski and her statement on the floor of the Senate, or Harry Reid and what he said on the floor of the House today, or what Obama said this morning. But let's go with Netanyahu. And Netanyahu, he starts out just bad-mouthing Ayatollah Khomeini. And then he gets into where he's now comparing President Rouhani to Ayatollah Khomeini. And he's hammering away on these folks. And then he comes out and he says the most gosh darned thing. I mean, it was beautiful. And I hearken back to when he said, you don't have to bring democracy to Israel. You don't have to defend Israel. Israel defends itself. Well, today he says, when it comes to Iran, if Israel must go this alone, Israel must go this alone. And, Mike, I have been wanting to say this for a long time. Benny boy, here's your parachute. We'll call them and tell them you're on the way to kick their butt all by your little old lonesome.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I mean, I think the world has had, or Americans at this point should have had enough of Israel saying, you Americans go kill this country, and you Americans go kill that country, and you Americans go kill that country. You know, if Israel wants to fight a war with Iran, let them go ahead and fight a war with Iran, and then when Russia and China come in on the other side, Israel will have to deal with that. But, of course, the real agenda is Israel is going to just start the war with Iran and then rely on previous commitments by the U.S. government to say, oh, we must defend our ally in the Middle East, no matter how many millions of other people's children it's going to take.
Well, you know, the only reason I bring this up is because last night, I was watching Press TV, and there was this interview going on where this fella said that Obama's ultimate goal, and this is what the American people don't realize, is to basically break the back of the Israel lobby and force Israel out of the picture so we can get to fixing this country. And I'm thinking to myself, well, if that's the case, we got Benny out there talking big cat smack. You know what? I say, let them go. You guys think you can take Iran? Man, you go for it.
Well, Israel can defeat Iran because Israel is a nuclear-armed state. But the political costs of Israel using nuclear weapons against Iran are going to backflash on them because Israel has been maintaining this nuclear ambiguity for all these years and trying to act like they're poor, helpless victims that need, you know, trillions in military assistance, not just from the U.S., but from Canada, from Europe, and all these other places. And for Israel to demonstrate that they had nuclear weapons all along is going to make the people in those countries very, very angry at having been giving all this money to Israel when Israel clearly did not need it. In the case of the United States of America, every single penny of tax money taken from your pocket and given to Israel in military assistance is a violation of United States law under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, both of which say the U.S. government cannot give your money to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty and refuses to allow IAEA inspections. Again, it's another monumental fraud being perpetrated against the American people by a U.S. government far more concerned with Israel's needs than with those of the American people.
Well, you know, I kind of have to question whether or not Israel would actually use a nuclear weapon because and here's my thinking. Bear with me on this, Mike.
Okay.
I seriously have some serious reserves as to whether or not Israel would actually use a nuclear weapon because we have all of these Geneva Conventions and all these accords and all of these international agreements, and it's international law that recognizes any use of weapons of mass destruction, be they chemical, biological, or nuclear, is automatically considered an active war and also is considered a war crime. So if by chance Israel actually did think that they had what it takes to take Iran out, they wouldn't be able to use a nuclear weapon because if they did, that would be the end of Israel. It would
be a political disaster, but if Israel launches war with Iran and we, the American people, storm Capitol Hill and say, look, Israel got into this mess on its own, don't you dare send our children to die in this war, then Israel in a conventional war with Iran is going to be in a very serious situation. Despite all these modern weapons we're giving them, they're really not effective soldiers. They're basically cowards. That's why they're always working to get America to go fight their wars for them. They didn't do all that well in Lebanon. They didn't do all that well in Syria. If they go up against Iran, especially with Iran being supplied modern arms and material from Russia and China, Israel's going to lose. And they will never back off and say, we were wrong. They will resort to their nuclear weapons. But as you say, the political backlash for that will be absolutely devastating to Israel's legitimacy.
Yeah, they'd be finished, I think. I honestly believe if they resorted to nuclear weapons, the entire international community would say, you know what, guys, you are just way over the top, man. That's it for you.
Well, I think they're already starting to say that anyway, but Netanyahu is literally betting the existence of his own country that if he attacks Iran, the obedient U.S. government will say, here, take millions of young Americans to fight the war. Here's some more bombs. Here's some more bullets. Here's some more whatever.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, I appreciate it, man. You have a great one.
All right, thanks an awful lot. All righty, moving right along. Very interesting story. Apparently, First Lady Michelle Obama tweeted today that her Twitter account will see fewer updates due to the government shutdown. Now, why would that be when Michelle Obama is not a government employee and doesn't receive a paycheck anyway, unless Michelle Obama's tweets are actually being tweeted by an employee posing as her to push the propaganda forward. So this is quite a revealing admission on her part to all of her tens of thousands of completely made-up phony Twitter followers. We'll be back after these commercials. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. Getting back and finishing up with the economy here. As you're probably already aware, we strongly recommend to Americans that they keep their money at home. Only have as much in the bank as you need to pay your immediate obligations because of the potential for a Cyprus-style haircut or a virtual 911, which would lock your money away in those banking computers. ATMs wouldn't be working. You should always keep your excess cash at home safely buried in that mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. And you should put some of it into physical silver and gold. Do not buy paper futures contracts. They are already oversold. They're being over-leveraged. When it starts to fall apart, when there's a gold run or silver run, those contracts are going to be worthless. And you can go over to republicbroadcasting.org or whatreallyhappened.com. You will find a banner ad there for the Republic Trading Group, where you can buy physical silver and gold. Right now, silver, ounce for ounce, is outselling gold 364 to 1 as of last month. And the reason is obvious. It takes a lot less to buy silver than gold, and in the event of a financial collapse, bartering with small silver is going to be a lot easier than trying to deal with a large chunk of gold. And another way that you can have silver on hand for barter is to go out to places like eBay and find what is called junk silver, which is the non-numismatically valuable silver content coins from before 1964 in the United States. Because they're a uniform shape, everybody will recognize them. They'll know what it's worth. Don't need to worry about converting it into Federal Reserve dollars. Just say, I need a gallon of gas. All right, 25 cents. Which, by the way, is what gasoline cost before the Federal Reserve took off hyperinflating and devaluing our content. Interesting story from over Investment Watch blog. We've been hearing from the government how the housing market is reviving, homes are being bought, and it turns out 60% of those new home purchases are all cash purchases. Money junkies who are buying up properties to turn them into rental property to perhaps shelter some of their wealth. There's even been allegations that some of these cash purchases are being used to launder drug money. Interesting story over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain. As you know, both of our nations have generations of college graduates, young people who were lured into a college education with promises of high-paying jobs, lured into taking out $10, $20, $50, $100,000 in student loan debt on the assurance that with that degree their paychecks would skyrocket and they could pay those loans off. Did not happen. The jobs requiring college education have pretty much evaporated, and this interesting story coming out of the Daily Mail is how this job center is literally telling these unemployed college graduates to dumb down their resume and remove the existence of a degree to get hired, because employers don't want to hire people who are overqualified because they know they'll get bored and at the first opportunity they'll go someplace else. So now these college graduated kids, saddled with thousands and thousands in student loan debt, unable to find the high-paying jobs they were assured would be out there, are being told to hide the fact they're college graduates just to get a job. All righty, we're going to grab a couple more phone calls here. Joe in Oklahoma. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Michael, something just kind of popped into my head a few days ago. Do you think there's any chance that the accumulation of ammunition could be just a clandestine way to get it to maybe the rebels or possibly something else in the future that might be happening overseas?
Well, that would be a war crime because by treaty, arms used in a conflict are supposed to be full metal jacket only and only of certain sizes. And we know the Department of Homeland Security has been buying billions of rounds of hollow point man-killer ammunition, which is illegal to use in war. So I'm not sure. There may be a slight diversion, but I think the implication here is that the U.S. federal government has and is preparing to go to war against the 50 states and the American people.
Thank you. Appreciate your opinion.
All right, and we're going to switch over to George in Texas. Aloha, George. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
How you doing, Mike?
Doing great.
You know, the thing is, I've been hearing this more like what the establishment was going to do with us and how the insurance companies written Obamacare and like United Healthcare, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Humana, and they got a couple other insurance carriers that are trying to that written this bill that sort of like made them exempt. Well, you're just hearing how the stock after Obamacare had just like doubled and tripled and all that stuff. And the best thing how we can wage economic warfare is, you know, since these exchanges are glitched and all that stuff, and Texas hasn't set up their exchanges yet. I just think their stocks are going to plunge because nobody can afford them.
Yeah, this is an absolute disaster. The system that they put in there, we're getting complaints from literally all across the nation. It doesn't work. They can't log in. It's miscalculating premiums and benefits. This is an epic fail, and we're basically seeing Obama out there, you know, with his ego and his vanity saying, my name is on this, it will move forward. And really, last week, the prudent and wise thing for Congress to have done was to go along with the House plan to pass the debt ceiling increase with the condition Obamacare be delayed a year, and we would not be in a government shutdown, and this Obamacare disaster would not be happening. Looking at the software that I am seeing at their website and the screenshots being sent into me, this software is a year away from being usable. Georgie, you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah. I know. It's just, I just think Obamacare is going to collapse on itself. And, you know, it's just, and the thing is, we can't allow this law to destroy our economy. And for employers and small businesses, I just think they're going to have to make a decision. You either comply with your own destruction or stand up, you know, because
well,
I'm not going to go.
I mean, Amazon is firing their permanent full-time workers, and they're bringing on part-time or something like 70,000, which makes the job report look better because a part-time job is judged as one along with a full-time job. But we're seeing that all across the country. Hours are being cut. Nancy Pelosi is out there saying, well, just think of what you'll do with that extra 20 hours a week. Like this is a good thing when you're on minimum wage.
Well, I know what I would do with extra 20 hours a week. I'd be calling my Congress critters.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Mike.
All right, and we're going to switch over to Sheila in Michigan. Aloha, Sheila. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello?
Hello. You're on the air.
Hello. Oh, thank you. I need to hear that We the People song. Can you play it before I have to leave? It's my birthday, man.
Well, I'm unable to play it from here. I'm not set up to do music because I'm not a boss jock with platters that matter. But you can go over to the website for the radio show, which is wrhradio.com, and there is a music player in there, and I think it's in there in its entirety, and if it isn't, I'll put it in as soon as today's radio show is over, okay? All right, thanks an awful lot. Now, part of the problem that we're dealing with, and this is what happens when money junkies are making all the decisions, is the company owners and the bosses want to get richer and richer, and they treat their employers poorer and poorer. And there's this weird story that came out over at GrahamClewley.com, how researchers uncovered a very serious bug in Yahoo, and they sent it into Yahoo and said, this is a problem, you need to fix it, or it's going to cost you lots of money and lots of problems. Apparently, Yahoo's idea of a reward for these researchers who found this bug was to send them a $12.50 voucher with which they can buy an official Yahoo T-shirt. And if you're not rewarding good performance by employees, the good performance goes away. And we're already seeing in this country people who actually know how to do things, they're leaving the country, going to greener pastures. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Congress is still battling it out, going back and forth between the House and the Senate. The Senate just voted through another version of the emergency spending bill, keeping their exemption. See, that's why I think a lot of people are really upset with Obamacare, because people in the government don't have to go along with it. Like I said, it's a repeat of the socialized medicine system of the former Soviet Union, where the ordinary people had to go through the system and deal with all of its problems. But the ruling elite, the Politburo, had private hospitals, private doctors, Western medicines, the very, very best of care. And they're trying to implement exactly the same thing here, and I think for a lot of Americans that's a non-starter. If Obamacare is so good, why isn't the president signing up for it? Why aren't members of Congress standing in line trying to get through to healthcare.gov? Very alarming situation. We're going to take a phone call here. Tony in Dallas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, thanks for taking my call. Hey, Mike, I could have sworn the sun still rose today when the government shut down.
Mm-hmm.
But I was just thinking that, there's that one gentleman, he always calls into your show. I haven't turned you on yet, but I knew you were on. But I kind of thinking that, since the government, so to speak, shut down, I was thinking, you've been talking about that, they may plot something like a bomb or some type of, chemical threat or whatever.
Yes.
I'm kind of thinking that that's their kind of avenue. What they wanted to do is to shut down, to kind of see, okay, well, you guys, look what happened. This is the Shabbat people came through and, put out this chemical or dropped this bomb here in the U.S.
Well, it's an interesting scenario, except that you need to understand that only 6% of the government has actually been shut down, and it's all in areas like food stamps, NOAA, NASA, the park police, public monuments, national parks, and Obama himself already explicitly stated that those segments of the U.S. government concerned with national security are still functioning fully. And as I keep saying, the next time there's a false flag in the United States, the message that every American should take away from it is not that we have to go kill Iran, but that obviously all this NSA spying in the Department of Homeland Security and TSA groping our crotches does not work and should be fired. When we talk about a government shutdown, what they shut down were those things that we like to have as an extortion attempt to get us to go along with those things that we absolutely oppose in this country. And I'm already getting people emailing me petitions saying, shut the whole thing down. 6% isn't enough. 100%. Shut it all down right now. Because it's not working for we the people.
In other words, they're kind of shutting down what directly affects the majority of the people, not the government itself.
That's exactly right here. And again, it's just a 6% shutdown. We have businesses in America that are trimming 6% off their payrolls, and they don't get this kind of news coverage proclaiming it's an absolute disaster.
Okay. Well, that's what I needed to know.
All righty. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Now, getting back to the economy. And again, I'm going to reprise that question from the first 2 hours that you have to be asking everybody you know. Why, when the Constitution allows the government to create and issue interest-free money, is the federal government borrowing currency at interest from a private central bank, condemning future generations of Americans to debt slavery to pay that currency back? That's an important question. And remember, every single nation on earth throughout history enslaved to such a private central bank scam has drowned in poverty for the people and debt for the people and made the bankers insanely rich. And we are seeing it all across the globe, not just here in the United States of America. Apparently the banks in the European Union are demanding more austerity from the Irish people. Give us more taxes to pay the debts and expect less back. That's the uniform message coming from the money junkies. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. You must make do with less so we can have more. The IMF has now issued a warning on the South African economy, saying they must implement reforms to avoid a crisis, meaning take more away from the people and give it to the bankers. All of these systems, all the way up to the one at the top, the Bank for International Settlements, it is a Ponzi scheme. And it is a trap, because the instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to that private central bank than actually exists. And the debt keeps piling up and piling up and piling up faster than the available money supply with which to pay the debt, and that is the debt trap. And it's used to control you, to enslave you, to harvest more and more of your work product and give back less and less and less until the system breaks down. But it only works if you believe that is the way life is supposed to be. It's rule by compound interest. And it is not a legitimate form of governance. It's no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works if the people can be tricked into believing that is the way life is supposed to be. When I went to grade school, we saw the little film strips about how the Federal Reserve was great, it was wonderful, this is the way life is supposed to be. And it wasn't until I was in college that I finally learned that this nation had been started with a completely different system of economics. Public currency is public utility that worked for the people and the nation without the private bankers. Meanwhile, over in Sudan, apparently they're getting preparations for wars. They're dealing with these riots over fuel costs. Everyone is in trouble because every one of these nations has been enslaved to this private central banking scam, and they're all coming apart at the same time, which does present an historic opportunity. Because of globalism, all these private central banks are linked to each other. And when one of them goes, it's probably going to drag the rest of them down. And we, the people of the United States, we, the people of planet Earth, need to be dedicated to the proposition of restarting our nations and our economies without these private central banks. We have to return to the system that worked for the nation and the people, not for the bankers. And one of the major reasons we should go back to the original governmental model of the United States, where power and authority is diffused across the entire land, is so that we don't have this giant Capitol building as a one-stop shopping center for all the corrupting influences in society. To go up there and simply bribe members of Congress to sell us into slavery. Force us to get vaccines we don't need. Force us to buy insurance most of us can't even afford. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Jeff in Colorado, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, there's one other question you need to ask people when you ask them about why does the government borrow money from a bank. I've been asking people that question for years.
Mm-hmm.
You need to also ask them, doesn't that put the bank in charge?
Oh, absolutely it's in charge. I've got a video of Alan Greenspan just openly saying the Federal Reserve answers to no federal government authority. It's a private bank. It's no more federal than Federal Express.
Sure.
And it's a scam. And when you put it in those simple terms, the U.S. government is allowed to create its own money. Kennedy did it. During the Kennedy administration, he did it. He put out those United States notes. That's what they killed him for. It's one of the reasons they killed him, along with
one of the reasons.
Well, the CIA hated him because of the
threat to the CIA was the biggest reason.
Well, I think one of the major reasons was that John F. Kennedy was absolutely adamant that Israel not acquire nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
That was a big one there. And the threat to the Federal Reserve was another. On the Warren Commission, they had John J. McCloy, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank, president of the World Bank, and I don't care how good a banker he is, he's not qualified to be investigating the murder of the president. So he was obviously there to make sure the economic dimensions and the link to the Federal Reserve of the assassination remained buried. Oh, it's this crazed lone nut in a Texas school book depository. You don't need to look any further than that.
Yep, got it. There was a book I read one time. I think it was called Final Judgment by Michael Collins Piper.
Yes, it's a very good book.
Yeah. That's a good book. That he done it as a thesis, and nobody will challenge him on it.
Yeah, it's very well researched, and again, we're in an age where Americans are simply not trusting and accepting of the official story on anything, which is a very healthy situation. And Americans are now looking back at all the things we've ever been taught, all the things we've ever been told, and they're looking for reasons not to believe those official stories, and they're finding them. Propaganda really isn't designed to survive careful thought and analysis. It's there just to give people who don't want to think a reason not to. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I want to talk about freedom. I know it's a word that gets bandied around a lot in our nation. We're indoctrinated with it at school. We are free. We are free. Freedom is important. But I think most Americans are now starting to realize we're not free at all. We haven't been throughout our entire lives. We are all slaves to that private central bank. And your chains are paper chains. And that paper is made up of Treasury bonds and Federal Reserve notes. Free people can say no to being scammed by bankers and politicians. Slaves can't. Those money junkies and those politicians, they don't want you to be able to say no. That's why they're trying to come after the guns. Because guns represent a right reserved to the people to say no when government gets too big for its britches, to put it delicately. Now, when this nation was started, the government created its own currency, spent it into circulation to buy what the government needed. It flowed through circulation without accruing any interest and then was taxed back at the end of the cycle in the same amount to balance the books. The public currency as a public utility, and it worked wonderfully well. It gave the new American nation one of the fastest growing economies and highest standards of living, because the reality is that nations enslaved to private central banks cannot compete with nations that don't have private central banks. That's why throughout history, anytime a nation tries to set up a state central bank, they're immediately made war on as an economic threat. That's what happened in Libya. That's what happened in Germany following the collapse of the Weimar Republic. The private central bankers cannot tolerate any one nation on this earth not enslaved to their system, because it will be so prosperous for the people that the rest of the world will say, hey, we want that system. We don't want this system we have here now. And that's what all these wars are all about, forcing private central banking onto the world to permanently entrap all of the human race in permanent unpayable debt, to keep them debt slaves until we go extinct or destroy ourselves or the sun swells up and eats our planet. That's why they're pushing so hard to do this, because once you are enslaved to that system of banking, you can never get out, not by playing by the rules. Because by design, this system creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt, to make your debt servitude permanent. If you are my age or a lover of folk music, you probably remember some of the folk music that came out of dark times in our nation's history, like 16 Tons, which has the lyric in there, I owe my soul to the company store, and it's a reference to the abuses of corporate-owned towns, company towns, where you would be lured to the company town with promises of high pay, and once you were there, the only stores you could spend your money in were owned by the company, and they always made the prices higher than you were being paid to push you into debt. And as long as you were in debt, you were not allowed to leave the company town. And there were hideous abuses of this kind of system all over the United States of America, until the communist revolution scared the heck out of the money junkies, and they backed off and said, all right, we got to let the workers have a little more money, keep them calm. And now with the collapse of the Soviet Union and the collapse of communism pretty much everywhere else, they're back to playing the same game, shoving you down into debt by design and keeping you there to keep you under control. But it only works if you believe that is the way life is supposed to be. And we know better. We are the most enlightened generation of Americans to come along in a century. And we realize it's all a scam to keep us slaves, to keep us working as hard as we can and turning over our work product in the form of taxes for which we get nothing back. We, the people, agree to pay taxes for things like good roads, good schools, good hospitals, to do for the community what the community needs but cannot organize for itself. That's the proper function of government. But this government simply harvests off our work product and shares it with their cronies. And that Federal Reserve scam is at the heart of it. Because when the government wants to borrow money, and it shouldn't have to borrow money because it's allowed under the Constitution to create its own, it prints up these treasury bills, and it trades them to the Federal Reserve in exchange for cash, and the Federal Reserve turns around and sells those treasury bonds to other investors who expect a highly profitable return on them. What backs the treasury bond? Your future slave labor. That is the only thing backing the treasury bond, and through the treasury bond, the Federal Reserve note. People like to say there's nothing backing the U.S. dollar. That's not entirely accurate. It's not backed by silver. It's not backed by gold. It's backed by your labor. Taken from you without your permission, for which nothing is given back in exchange, and that is slavery, or if you want to call it indentured servitude. But that's not what America is supposed to be about. It's not how America was started. Our nation's economy was hijacked by money junkies long before all of us listening to this show were even born. And now's the time to stand up and say it is a fraud. And as you go about your business this week, talking with your friends, your co-workers, people you meet at the store, forget about Obamacare, forget about finger pointing, forget about all the rest of this stuff. The question Americans must be asking right now is, why does the federal government, which has the authority to create and issue interest-free currency, instead borrow that currency from a privately owned central bank, thereby condemning Americans and future generations of Americans into lifetimes of toil and financial slavery? Especially in a system where it doesn't matter how much you work and how much you sacrifice, the debt can never be paid off, because by design, the debt is always greater than the total available money supply. We could take every single dollar on planet Earth, give it to the Federal Reserve, and on their books, the American people would still be trillions of dollars in debt, and it's all made up, make-believe numbers. Those trillions of dollars in debt we're told that we owe the Federal Reserve do not exist and never did. It's a scam. It's a hoax. It is the biggest fraud ever perpetrated against the American people by the banking establishment and the federal government, and you should be angry about this. If this Congress was really concerned about the welfare of the nation, they would revoke the charter for the Federal Reserve, which they are legally allowed to do anytime they want, zero out the debt and say, let's restart on a different system. But these members of Congress are in the process, even as they talk about raising the debt ceiling. What they are really doing is selling you and your children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren into the slavery of the money junkies. They're trying to bring back serfdom and feudalism. The American dream was that the people would own the land. Under serfdom, the land owns the people. That's where they're trying to take you and the entire world. Back to where the money junkies own it all, including your physical person. We have to stand up to them. We have to stand up and say, we know it's a scam. We do not authorize this government to borrow any more money because we will not and cannot pay it. The time has come for a radical change in the direction of this government and its economy. We need to go back to the system that worked for the nation and for its people. No private central banks. Ever, ever again. That's right at the top of the blueprint for the new America. No more private central banks given control of the nation's currency. There's our music. We got to head on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, Stay angry. Stay informed. Make good choices. Keep asking that question about government borrowing. We need to wake up America to this gigantic scam they were born into. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.